First of all, I want to apologize to all of you that our classroom went down for a couple of days. It's the first time that's ever happened, and it happened right at the beginning of the semester, which is quite unfortunate. Something about Murphy's Law could be said there. But we do want to apologize and thank you for being patient with us. Thank you for understanding that we worked on it as quickly as we could. The third part, it is a third party that hosted. Don't have a lot of direct control, but they were very quick to get it back up and running. So thank you for that. I hope you've had a chance to log into all of your classes. Look around. I think it's really vital and important for you to look at all of your classes you're enrolled in. Look at it, get a big picture of it, figure out what you're enrolled in, when are due dates, when do classes switch over, and all that. Before I turn over to our speaker tonight and kind of explain the content of this webinar, I want to give you a few things that I think are important just to, if you are a continuing student, to remind you of. If you're a new student, to tell you for the first time. I've boiled down 4 tips that you need to be successful in DLI. And if you might remember this from last semester, I shared this, and I won't go in much detail, but be sure to keep these 4 things in mind for you to be successful this semester. First of all, don't just be a student in the program, but be a student of the program. And what I mean by that is that it's up to you, it's incumbent upon you to read your syllabi, to know when due dates are, to know when webinars are, to understand what classes you take and when you need to order books and all those things, because as a student, the responsibility really is on you to do those things. There's a handful of us and there's a whole lot of you, and we do our best to communicate along the way. However, in any educational program you're in, and even serving in your church, just let me go and tell you from the perspective of your pastor or your leaders in your church, it's good for you to learn to take the initiative to find out what you need to be doing and when you need to be doing it. So be sure to do that. Find out if you need information about payments or financial stuff, who to go to. All that is clear on the website. Before you send an email to ask a question, make sure that you've already read the syllabus, that you've already scoured the website to make sure that you're doing your part to be a student, not just in the program, but of the program. Something else I would say that's really important is many of us understand the concept of spiritual authority. But it's important for you to realize that spiritual authority doesn't just involve submitting to people, it involves submitting to processes. Meaning that whenever you enter DLI, you made up your mind to do this, you are submitted now to the process that we've laid out before you. If you don't like a book, if you wish that it was structured differently, if you wish that you didn't have to discussion forums, if you wish you didn't have to watch webinars, all that's inconsequential at this point because you're in, like you've already signed up. You're in the process. And so a big part of your development as a leader is not just the books you're going to read and the assignments you're going to complete. A big part of your development as a leader is saying, okay, I'm going to submit to this process. I signed up for it. I'm not going to critique everything. I'm going to go in and I'm going to do it. It's also going to help you out in serving in your local church as well when you learn that you don't have to understand every process to submit to it. You don't have to understand everything your pastor asks you to do to submit to it. So just be sure to submit to the process. Finally, I'll say you have time to do whatever you want to do. You have time to do whatever you want to do. You may feel like you don't have enough time to complete your assignments. You do. There's a lot of you going into the second semester, and you've actually got to read like whole books now, not just fill in the workbook, but you got to actually read a book and write some, like, oh, I don't have time for that. Trust me, you have time to do it. You'd be amazed at what you want to do, that you can always do what you want to do. We all have the same amount of time. You don't have a time management problem. You have a self-management problem. It's not about managing time. It's about managing yourself to make time for what's important. I'm going to go out on a limb and say something pretty bold, and then I'll let Paul take it over here, and he'll calm this down. But if you can't find the time to do your DLI assignments, then a substantive leadership role in the church is probably going to be beyond you, just to be honest. Because if you can't find time for an hour or two a day or just to get your assignments done, then you're probably going to have a difficult time ever playing a substantial role in your local church beyond that of just the volunteer who shows up on Sunday or what. Because life takes, like anything you want to do in life that you're passionate about, it just takes time. If you want to be good at anything, it takes time. You're not going to get better overnight. It's going to take time and commitment. So you always have time to do what you want to do. Now, if you've been in our program for a little while, you realize that the internship is a little different this semester. What we've tried to do is we've tried to streamline it. In the past, we've had this idea of internship that wasn't completely spelled out and didn't have all the bones on it. And we reached out to Paul Cook, who's going to join us in just a moment, asked him to help us. Paul has a very impressive resume, a very wise man, and he helped us develop this new schematic that we have for our internship, where the first semester you're going to focus your service in a ministry. You're going to choose a ministry and serve the ministry. The second semester you're enrolled in DLI, you're going to turn that focus from the ministry, keep doing your same task, however, turn your focus towards the leader of the ministry so that you can begin to serve them and try to improve what they're doing and to add value to them. The third semester, you take that attention to your pastor and begin to serve your pastor and let him know that you appreciate the ministry that he's giving him, and try to carry some of his responsibilities. Then the fourth semester, we're going to ask you to begin to spearhead some projects and to begin to do things that not only improve the ministry you're involved in, but that improve the local church in general. And we'll be giving you more specific instruction as the semesters go on. But every semester that we have, we are going to, or every webinar we have, the content is we focus very specifically on helping you serve the church better. The first webinar of the semester will be about serving in your ministry. The second semester will be about the second webinar will talk to you about how you can serve the leaders of your ministry. The third webinar of the semester will talk about how you can serve your pastor better. And the fourth webinar of the semester will talk about how you can serve your church as a whole better. So this will be very focused and very, very specific. In the past, the webinars have kind of been like, how I grew up going to church. It's like, whatever I feel like speaking on Sunday is what we're going to talk about. But we're going to be very intentional, not just what we want to do, but we're going to be very intentional on your training and your development. If you're not able to watch the webinars live, we still ask you to write the one-page summary for some accountability for you to try to attend live. But even if you attend live or if you have to write the paper, one thing we're going to ask you to do is participate in the discussion forums located in your internship course, where you'll have an opportunity to discuss what you've learned here in the forums. Every student, every semester, internship happens. So now it's going to be just very specific about what you're supposed to be doing during these times. And I'm sure you'll have questions. If you do, you can email Stephanie or I, and we'll clear it up for you, make sure that you're good there. But tonight, Paul Cook's going to join us, and Paul's going to tell us a little bit about himself first. Then he's going to launch into tonight's topic, which is developing a baseline of service, which means that there's something that everyone who is serving in a church and wants to serve at a high level, there are just some baseline qualities and traits. Like if you can't meet this standard, then you're missing the mark. So we're going to talk about what are the basic things that are expected for someone serving in their local church. Paul and I both share a passion for the local church, that we think that the church is the hope of the world, and that all of us should not be so concerned about discovering what our individual purposes are. We should be saying, okay, what is the purpose of the church, and how do I join in and make sure that thing happens? So this semester, next year, let's really focus on being all that we can be for God and for the church. Paul, I'm going to turn it over to you now. Blow us away with your wisdom.
Oh, yeah. Blow us away with your wisdom. Okay. Well, hey, it is a thrill to be apart with you guys tonight. There are many things that I've done in ministry, and my favorite thing of all is to develop leaders, to coach leaders, to recognize talent, give people opportunity. Through the history of my ministry, the thing I'm the most proud of is the long list of names of young people and adults that I had the privilege of working with and coaching. When I was a young leader, I wished people would have told me things. I wish they would have coached me. I wish they would have said hard things to me. Mostly people just pat you on the back when you do an okay job, and they say nothing when you do a sorry one. And I just, I always felt like I didn't get good coaching. So I was an observer, and I went to the School of Hard Knocks, but I determined early on that I was going to give straightforward coaching and teaching and say some things that needed to be heard so that people could really become their best. So I see passionate leaders that need to hear things. And so that's always been a part of what I've done. I've been a youth pastor, full-time youth pastor. I traveled the country with coaching teams on youth ministry. I was a youth president of a district for a denomination. Got a lot of exposure teaching camps and that sort of thing. I started my first opportunity to pastor a church at 27. I didn't feel ready for that, but it was kind of thrown upon me. It was basically a church plant. We had no building. We rented facilities. Went from there, pastored an established church that was kind of old and stuck in tradition, and turned that around. Did about 10 years there. Started another church with about 28 people, and got it to a health and a thriving place, and turned it over to a young man. And now I'm on my fourth pastorate. But my favorite thing in all of those settings is building the teams, building the administration, building the leaders, putting the right people on the bus and the right seats on the bus. So I hope that in the webinar tonight, we can give you a little bit of information that really challenges you to become what you need to be your best. So take some notes. If you're a note taker and you don't want to take every note, take the things that really hit you square in the face and say, I need to be challenged by this. So take some notes. Also, I'm watching on the forums. I know that may be new for some of you, but I've noticed that many of you have not responded on the forums yet. You didn't go to the syllabus maybe and read it and do the quiz. The first forum was about where you're going to be serving. And then you'll have a forum that you need to respond to after this tonight. So I'll be watching all of those and monitoring that and commenting. And it's important to me. And I'm not a passive participant. I'm going to be there for you. I don't know if you watched the Super Bowl Sunday night. You could have fallen asleep. It was not a very good game. It was like, what did they have? It was 3-3 in the third quarter. It took to the fourth quarter to get any action. Anyway, what separates good teams from great teams? Well, if you aren't a New England fan, you might say cheating, the cheaters. And then if you're maybe a New Orleans fan, you might say a bad call. But the teams were there, and they are great. And those teams that make it to those levels are great teams because they master the basics. In football, the basics don't change. It's just that people do them better and better. College games are more fun to watch because they're more volatile, because the coaching is maybe not quite there. The maturity of the players is not there, so it's a lot more explosive. But when you get to the pros, it's like those guys have studied each other, and they tore up the middle of the field at the Super Bowl because they had a game plan and they executed it, masterfully. Made for a boring game, but it was, it was some good coaching. So basics really, you never get away from the basics. And that's what I want to kind of deal with tonight. They say 90% of success is showing up. It's just a basic requirement. Just be there and you're on your way. And that's true. Much of what makes a great leader is basics. Not the typical things that we associate with greatness. Sometimes it's just a lack of negatives. My daughter, who's just turned 17, got one of her first jobs, and she was just so excited. And it was a Christmas job, and she thought, well, I'm going to get let go after the season. But they called her in, and they said, well, the management team here is moving to a bigger store, and we're not taking anybody else with us, but we'd like to take you. So she called me, up, and she said, Dad, when you pick me up from work, come and sit down with me, and I got something to tell you. So she sat me down at the restaurant, and she went into the whole thing about how they talked to her and how they gave her this opportunity. And she said, Dad, it's like an emotional promotion. She didn't get any money, but she felt really, really good. But the whole thing was, I knew that she would be successful there. because she has, just growing up in our home, a lot of basics about work ethic, honesty, straightforwardness, do your job, stuff, just real basic things. A lack of negatives sometimes make you a great leader. If you couple the basics with some exceptional talent, then what you actually have is an unusual leader. There are not a lot of them, that when you mix talent with all these really well executed basics, now you've got somebody that's a real standout leader. But let's take the talent out of it, right? Let's take the talent out of the equation. Let's take the exceptional out of the mix. And let's talk about the aspects of leadership service that all of us can accomplish. Examines baseline, basic service that everyone on this webinar can do and be a tremendous asset to an organization. This is basement stuff. This is foundation on which everything else is built. So taking that whole thought of baseline service and baseline activity that gets you started, I want to look at the ministry of Jesus for a moment. Jesus, the story of Jesus launching his ministry started in, one of the readings is Luke chapter 4. And he was already 30 years old, and he goes into the synagogue and launches his ministry. And the account in Luke 4 was the accumulation, though, and the culmination of a lot of preparation. I did an extensive study on this chapter, and it's become part of my life message. And I identified some things that Jesus already was, some values that he already had before he ever spoke a word in that synagogue, before he ever said, I'm going to do something great and watch this. He had some values that he brought with him, and they were in place before he ever spoke a word, before he ever made a declaration. There was this baseline that you see evidenced in that chapter. And the first thing, the chapter talks about is that Jesus went into the wilderness 40 days of fasting. So I'm going to give you 6 values, and I might pause here in between, Landon, and pitch it to you a little bit if you have anything that you'd like to say. But the first one, the first baseline thing that all of us need to value is process. Scripture says that he came out of the wilderness. Before he started his ministry, he came out of something. He came out of a wilderness, and he was honoring a process of waiting until he was 30 years old to launch his ministry. That was a long process. He was a child prodigy. At 12, he went into the temple and people saw him as exceptional, but he didn't capitalize on that. He waited until he was 30 years old. He waited until he'd gone through some process. He waited until he'd come out of a wilderness of temptation. He'd been through some stuff. Now you think about the Apostle Paul, he gets knocked down on the road to Damascus, has this great revelation, and he gets up and he runs to Damascus and he starts telling everybody. Well, yeah, that one didn't work out too good because he just about got himself killed. They had to let him down over the wall in a basket, and then he disappears for 3 years. He gets to do the process, right? Even though he's a smart guy, even though he's like uber talented, nobody gets a pass on this. I think of Jacob in the Old Testament that, it was supposed to be Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. That was the way that the flow was going to go. And Jacob is trying to interrupt that process and get, some recognition. He's passionate about being a leader. He wants to do something like many of us. And so he gets in front of his brother, and we know how he deceives and manipulates, and he does all of this kind of stuff. And finally he gets booted out of his family's house for all of his, he's got the right passion and the right heart, but he gets booted because of he didn't go through a process. And he gets out and he's under the stars, and he has this dream about a ladder coming up and going down from heaven. And God lets him know it's not Abraham, Isaac, and Esau. It's Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That was news. He'd been striving for this, but that was news. That was a revelation. In fact, he made his whole commitment of tithing and everything else he made a commitment to because of the promise, not to get the promise, but because God made him a promise. So he leaves there and he goes to Laban's house, and the first thing he sees is Rachel, and he goes, oh my goodness, if God's going to bless me, if it's going to be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, then that's the chick I'm marrying, right? And so he works 7 years like a crazy man, and he walks the aisle, and he gets Leah. Oh my goodness. And he looks at Laban, he's like, what's the deal? I mean, I worked 7 years. You told me it was going to be Rachel. And this is how a lot of people start ministry. They start down the path thinking it's going to be beautiful. If God's going to bless me, here's how it's going to be. I'm going to have a microphone in my hand 24/7. I'm going to be amazing. And then you work 7 years and you find out it's a big old slog, and you get handed Leah, ugly Leah. And Leah, and then he lives with Leah, and he works another 7 years, and Leah's having baby after baby, and she's so productive. And God shuts up Rachel's womb, you know the story. But finally, I think Jacob realizes, hey, Leah is giving me a lot of blessing here. This thing that I didn't like so much is really producing for me. If you look at the end of Jacob's life, he was buried with Leah and not with Rachel. Rachel's the one that had the gods under her skirt. And talk about, our talent. Sometimes our talent's the very thing that will deceive us and not really serve us. But think of Leah as like the service, and Rachel he had it right. He had it right because Rachel, what was born of Rachel was Joseph. And that was that was the coat of many colors. He put it on there. I mean, he loved that talent side, but he got more out of Leah in the long run. So Jesus understood process, and he came out of the wilderness. And I don't think any of your talent is going to carry you as nearly as far or be nearly as productive as the Leahs in your life, and the enduring and the staying power and the loyalties and the hard work and the ugly stuff and the service. You have to get set for that if you're going to really endure. I'll pitch it to you for a minute there, Landon. I've talked about 200 words a second there.
Well, great stuff. I love what you're talking about with the process and the baseline. My hobby of choice, as many people know, is I like to run long distance. And the reason why is because I have so little talent that I'm not athletically gifted. So I don't have a lot of coordination. I don't have a lot of, I've never been an athletic guy. But when it comes to running, it literally is just years of me learning to put one foot in front of the other and just not quitting and not stopping. And so now I can run further distances than I've ever ran. I'm not going to brag. I'm not that fast, but I'm faster than most people, just because most people don't run at all. I mean, it's not like I'm actually that fast, but it's just compared to people that aren't running. And so I have I'm good at this, not because I have any sort of natural gifting, but because I've submitted to the process of training, of putting the miles in, of being dedicated. And that's a metaphor. I talk about it a lot because the metaphor for what I feel my life in ministry is that I'm not always the smartest or the most gifted, but I just work really, really hard at it. And then I love what you're saying, because I feel like so often we think it's our talent that's going to take us places, but our talent doesn't always get discovered. I mean, there's if you go to little cafe or bar in Nashville or wherever you go, there's someone that's more talented than the recording artist. Like, talent does not always equal getting the breaks, right? What you get is just consistency. One thing I can't control my breaks. I can't control my opportunities. Man, if we would focus as much time on being consistent as we do about personal branding and trying to open doors ourselves, and if we got as passionate about just doing the right thing over and over again, we'd see a lot more fruit in our life. That we can't always handle our fruitfulness, but we can handle our faithfulness. We can't handle the outcome, but we can handle our attitude. We can handle the things that we can handle, and then it's up to God to take care of the rest.
So Yeah, so part of the service thing, I think, coming through some wildernesses, coming through some processes, coming through, um, some iterations, being a slogger when it's, boring, when it's hard, when it takes discipline. Uh, I've never been, a lot of preachers are a Monday, take Monday off. I don't like taking Monday off because to me, that's the biggest work day of the week. I'm like after Sunday, everything that needs to be done. I can't rest. I got to get up and go do something about it, right? And slog. And Monday is a slog, but you got to slog. Anyway, so how long you been serving? How long are you thin-skinned? If you haven't been around a while, you might get real thin-skinned when somebody criticizes you, or just the humanness of people. I had a guy this week that wants me to slaughter somebody because he didn't respond to his leadership. So some guy that was under him didn't respect him like he should. And it's true, he didn't respect him. The leader didn't necessarily present himself too good either. But the guy then responded in kind and didn't obey. And now he wants me to be the axe man, go take his, off with his head, and just, blow him out of the water, blow him out of the organization. I think he would be happy if I did that. But you learn that there's a lot of humanness in people too. When you're leading, you can't just blow everybody away. You have to deal with some of the brokenness of the messiness of relationships and people and raising up leaders. And you need to be able to endure a little criticism and people that misspeak or don't recognize you like they should. If you're going to get in a pouting mode and look for all of that kind of stuff, you'll never be done. So you have to come through some wildernesses and survive things. And I think you have to be able to handle your own life. And that takes a little while, right? Your bills, your family, your marriage, making all that run smooth. That's part of the wilderness. Be a proven winner in the arenas that you've already been serving in. Don't expect to go to the next one when you muffed up the last one. So I like to tell people don't have to be reminded, right? If somebody's reminding you, you've already miscommunicated and you may have already done a bad job. If you need reminded, right? Don't stop at the first roadblock on something that you're working on. Don't bail because it got hard or dump it back on the leader. If you're going forward, you got to deal with some wildernesses if you're going to come out of the wilderness. So that's one of the values that I see in Jesus before he ever speaks. The second one is that he comes out of the wilderness full of the Spirit, not full of bitterness, not full of whining, not full of hurt, not depressed, not entitled, not with cynicism, not with suspicion of everybody, but Spirit-filled, right? So he dealt with his wilderness and all the stuff and still had this power within. And somebody on Facebook this week said they were sending love out there to everyone who's been through some life hurts that they avoid talking about. I guess we all have it, right? And you have to shelf those things and let the Spirit be maintained in your life. I kind of look at being Spirit-filled as a part of my sacraments, right? We take communion, we're baptized, we talk about sacraments, but I kind of feel like the Lord also commanded us to be filled with the Spirit. And I choose to be filled with the Spirit. I feel the Spirit right now when I say it. I choose that. I can get up and adopt another kind of mentality at any day of the week for all the pressures that are on me. But I choose to be filled with the Spirit, and I pray and I allow the Spirit to pray through me. And no one can maintain your spirit for you. You are responsible for your heart. I like 2 Corinthians 7:1, and I'll stop on this diatribe. But, the scripture says that we should cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit. Not Jesus doing it, not the preacher doing it, not Sunday at the altar. Cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh and spirit, perfecting holiness in the fear of God. So we're maturing in our way, and we choose that. I choose to be Spirit-filled. Jesus came through a wilderness, and he was able to be Spirit-filled. So these are basics. I mean, these are the kind of people I'm looking for. people that have been through a couple things and they still got the heart right.
So good, Pastor Paul. And one thing I would add about being filled with the Spirit for a leader, it's Ephesians 5:23, where Paul says, "Do not be drunk with wine, but be filled with the Spirit." And since you guys are Bible students, I can get a little more Greek nerdy with you than I can with my congregation. But the be filled with the Spirit is a present passive imperative in the Greek. So it's an imperative, which means it's a command. That's what an imperative is. Like, go do this. So Paul's saying, be filled with the Spirit. This is a command, something you have to do. But then the command is passive, though. It's be filled. In other words, you cannot fill yourself. You have to be filled with something outside of you. So it's your job to be filled, but yet you can't do it on your own. God has to fill you. So there's this, even in the word itself, to be filled with the Spirit, there's this like tension between I do it and God does it. But most importantly, Paul juxtaposes that, with be filled with the Spirit with do not be drunk with wine. In other words, he sees this parallel there. So just like too much wine or liquor or beer or whatever it is, too much, it takes your actions and causes you to do something that you might not otherwise do, right? Like, so no one ever says, I drank too much last night and had a kale smoothie. It's, like I drank too much and I ate bad. I made decisions I regret. I did things that I wish I hadn't had, but because I was drunk with wine, I did things that I normally would not do. Paul is comparing that to being filled with the Spirit, which whenever you're filled with the Spirit, you begin to do things that you normally would not do. And so often we get one step ahead and we try to do the things. Like, we try to be patient. We try to preach well. We try to serve well. We try to lead this project. We try to organize this team. We try to do these things. We take our Enneagram, and get our Enneagram number, and we take our DISC profile, and we try to do all these things. And but if you're not filled with the Spirit, it's the Spirit that empowers you to do things that you normally can't do. And so if you're doing things that you could do without the Spirit, then you're not going to be the kind of leader that's going to be effective in the kingdom of God, because we aren't called to do natural things. We're called to do supernatural things. We're not called to do things that only matter for a short period of time. We're called to do things that are eternally important. And so we need a force working on the inside of us that empowers us to do things beyond our natural abilities. And that's a baseline of serving.
Comes out of the wilderness, so he honors process. He's 30 years old, so it's been a while. And then he demonstrates that not only can he go through a wilderness, but he can maintain his spirit. And then the Bible says that he went into the synagogue on the Sabbath day, as was his custom. This was one of the first time that he entered the synagogue. In fact, this was his regular habit. So the third value that I see in Christ is dependability. Somebody noticed that he always went to the Sabbath, and he went to the synagogue on the Sabbath. It was a custom. People that are valuable in the kingdom of God and as leaders and participants and servants in the church are dependable people. They have some habits. You can set your clock to them, right? We got this guy in our church, and he, at our Serve Awards night, he got double the votes from the from the leaders and the volunteers of anybody else. I mean, in the whole, that's amazing. He got twice as many as anybody else. And the guy, I mean, I could set my clock to when he shows up at church and the things he does. And afterwards, one of the final things he does, even though it's really not even on his task list, he's going to turn the lights out. Well, there's still people in the building. We got other services, we got foreign language services, but he's, in his mind, he had that, we got to turn the lights out. And if there's people there still, he'll walk up to me and say, I'm not turning out the lights because, there's still people here. Or is that okay? So dependable, right? Dependable people, you'll notice, are slower to commit to things. They'll ask questions. If you come up to them and say, I would like you to now be the next X thing over the whole deal. And they will say, they'll start asking you questions. They may say, well, let me think about that for a little bit. And then they're going to ask you some more questions. And they're going to be slow to commit because they know that once they commit, they're going to deliver. And they want to qualify their involvement so that they can do it dependably. Jesus had customs. We should have customs. Just being on time. You want to be a player with your pastor, you want to be a player with key ministries in your church, and then you just don't show up to church, or you don't show up to something and there's no text, you're late for a meeting, you don't call, you don't say anything, you're sloppy, right? The people that work closely with leaders understand the value of their attendance there and when they're not there. And they will tell you in advance, hey, I'm going to be out. I've backfilled with this. I've done that. Their habit is to attend. And if they're not going to attend, they're telling you. Another thing about dependability is tithing. And, we're leaders here, right? And I don't hammer hard on this from the pulpit all the time. I do encourage people and I teach on it. But, I'll say to the leaders here, you're not going to go anywhere if you don't get your financial stuff together enough to be a tither. I mean, you're going to go into ministry and later on expect people to pay you to do things out of their tithe, but you never tithed. Now, that doesn't work. No, that's baseline stuff. The tithe isn't even ours. The tithe is the Lord's. And I realize that's an Old Testament principle, but if the New Testament then is going to be overlaid on that, then it's a bigger thing. Our whole life belongs to God. Everything's His. But I believe that you carve out the tithe. You don't designate it for missions. You don't give it to some other thing. You put it in the house of God in your place that you're serving. And that is a baseline thing that you need to be dependable like clockwork. I mean, if you can't remember to do it, go put it on auto pay. You just need to be dependable. So have some customs and dependably perform them. And Jesus did this. For the sake of time, you want me to go to the next one, or you got some comment?
Go ahead.
Okay. So then when he's in the synagogue, the Bible says, and then he stood up to read. Now, he didn't have to stand up, right? But he stood up to read. Not everybody stood up to read, but he stood up to read. Leaders stand up. Leaders stand out. And this area, this value, I'm going to call willingness, right? So we've had process, spirit-filled dependability, and willingness. The willingness to work, the willingness to participate when others, are measuring it out and saying, oh, well, I don't want to do anything. We joke sometimes that really what leadership ministry is just chair and table moving. And then you get a promotion and you get to be a chief chair and table mover. But I think I'm still moving tables and chairs. It's just a part of, and you can't run from that stuff. You have to stand up when others won't stand up. And when you stand up, sometimes that can be misread. Think of David, his brothers looked at him and said, well, what do you think you are? And sometimes people don't stand up because of a false humility. And what it really is pride, right? They won't stand up or stand out because they don't want anybody to think that they're trying to be something. Well, hey, we are trying to be something. Because the answer should be exactly what David gave. That is there not a cause, right? So we stand up and we make ourselves vulnerable and we stick our necks out. And this is not total willingness, right? I don't really care to work with people who are totally willing. You have to know your limitations. Like the guy who's going to build a tower, you have to measure before you say yes. I've had so many things dumped back on my desk and now it's a crisis, right? And I got to rescue it. And I'm good at rescuing stuff, but it makes me mad. I'm never going to call on that guy again because I'm not going to get dumped on again, right? So don't be willing and then not deliver. So know your limitations if you're going to build a tower, if you're going to say yes, right? But I'm talking about menial things here. Don't be shy about just menial labor and getting involved and getting your hands dirty. People will respect you for it. Leaders will respect you for it. The people that you ask later on to work for you will say, hey, he'd do it. He'd get down there and be dirty and do it. I've seen him do it. I can do it for him. And you don't think you're too much. You're too big. Jesus stood up. And then I'm going to give two more points. I'll pitch it back to you. He stood up to read, and he called for the book of Isaiah, right? Or they handed him the book of Isaiah. Well, this wasn't the first time he traveled through the book of Isaiah. He looked up the place and he found the place where it was written, right? He was a learner. This is the point. This is the value, learning. Of course, all of you are signed up for DLI, so it's like preaching to the choir, but He was a learner. I'm a learner when I'm not signed up for classes. I've got 4 books on my desk right now that I'm reading, and I can't get enough of them. And I got 5 more I'd like to read, and I'm curious about a lot of things, and I want to be on the internet. And I love studying. I want to know things. Be curious. If you're leading in an area, don't be the expert. I mean, if you're the small groups leader, know all about it. Get the books. Help the pastor know what he should do. Give him confidence what's going on. Learn, man, gobble it up. Interesting speakers have a wide reading and exposure to things. If you're not a reader, there's just so many other ways to learn, but learn. Jesus stood up to read, and it wasn't the first time that he had visited those passages. He was a learner. And the last thing was, when he started to speak, he said, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor." Anointed means he's designated me. And my last point of baseline thing is know your uniqueness. It's uniqueness. Be a learner, and then uniqueness. Value your uniqueness. Don't try to be somebody else. Don't try to be Stephen Furtick. I feel so many young people rob sermons from guys on the internet, and repreach them, and it just be yourself. Everybody knows that you're faking your way through. Just be who you are. Don't try to be somebody else. Just be you. You're the best you there is, and God made you for a unique reason. Jesus understood that he was anointed for a specific purpose, and so are you. Anointed means designated. David was a boy shepherd, and then he was designated to be a king. You were just a servant. You had a heart. You loved God, and then he designated you for something. Be comfortable with that. Be comfortable in your lane, and God will honor you for it.
It's, man, such good stuff. To be willing to be a learner and to value your uniqueness. We just want to invite all the students now to begin to pitch us some questions, things that you'd like to know more about. We got about 15 to 18 minutes before we have to wrap up, so you guys can get ready for the State of the Union and pop your popcorn and do all that you're going to do for that. So we want to wrap up by 7:30. But whatever your questions might be, feel free to send those in to us. I can't comment on everything you said. First of all, I can't add much to it. It was so well done for the brief amount of time that you had. So thank you for that. But one thing I've learned about being a learner is I've always been a learner. But now that I'm in a pastoral role that I've had for about a year now, I've learned how valuable it is when people that are serving in our church don't look to me to be the fount of all wisdom and knowledge, because I don't know everything. And so for someone to take the initiative on themselves to go, hey, we recently had this happen where we've had just great crowds at our church. Things are going well. And so someone came to me and said, look, I want to start researching what it looks like to go to 2 services, like what needs to happen, what are the processes to make a successful move. And the thing is, we're still probably months away from that happening, but for a leader in our church to be that proactive, it is like, wow, like I'm not doing this by myself. And so just being a learner, be willing, if you see something that needs to be done, don't always wait for instructions from your leader to go do it. Go learn how to do it. Go become an expert on it. Go become the point person. I think that's so good. Just that willingness to be a lifetime learner. Willingness is important. Valuing your uniqueness, that Jesus said he knew exactly what he was called to do, and he did that. And something that I think we can kind of compare is value your uniqueness and then dependability, because sometimes we value our uniqueness to a point, or I guess value your uniqueness and willingness. We value our uniqueness to a point where we're not always willing to do things. It's like, well, I'm not called to do that. Like, I'm not sure, like I'm not called to do janitorial work. I'm not called to serve in the nursery. I'm not called to, Lord has really just anointed me to have a microphone, and, so we've got to we've got to keep these two things in balance where, yes, you do have a unique call that God's called you to do something that created you for a very specific purpose, created you on purpose for a purpose. However, there's got to be a general willingness. Pastor Paul, I don't know about you, but as a leader, I do about 100 things every week that I don't really like to do.
Oh man, come on.
That I don't really feel called to do. Like, I don't really feel called to answer all the emails. I don't really feel called to have the difficult conversations. I don't feel called to do any of those things. I'm not a confrontational person. I don't really see myself as like this leadership guru, fount of wisdom. I don't feel called to any of those things, but they have to be done. So learning to value your uniqueness and learning when to say no and when to really hone in on what you're uniquely created to do, but also knowing when to say, you know what, if it needs to be done, I'll do it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole thing with the Jacob and Leah thing. I think the Lord will fix that in you, and you'll have this cloud over you and this wall or a ceiling on your leadership that just stays there. If you don't have that attitude, it'll be there. And I think God won't remove it until you figure it out. I mean, for Jacob, he lost Joseph. I mean, he loved that Joseph, man. He was born of Rachel. That was the talent. That was his boy. And man, the next thing he sees is blood on that coat. And that dude was sold into slavery, and he had a long grieving period. And sometimes our talent doesn't get to be showcased for many, many, many years while we slog through and get these values and these very productive values that Leah brings to us through service.
Right. I think there's always a time between when God calls us to do something and then when we actually see it happen. So you look at Abraham, he's called when he's 75, father of the nations, going to have a son, descendants, all that. Well, then he's 100 before it actually happens. There's a 25-year window where he really just had to walk it out. And sometimes we think, okay, God says, leave the Ur of the Chaldeans. And the moment that you leave the Ur of the Chaldeans, you're going to walk into the promised land and see the promises happen. But really, there's this process as leaders that we just have to consistently walk. Think of another example, David and Saul. They're two extremes. Saul is anointed king and he becomes king. And that happens on occasion, but rarely. David is anointed king, and it's a long process before he's able to exercise his kingship.
Which one would you rather be?
Right.
In the end, I mean, whose story do we champion? It's not
right.
Saul's. Yeah.
Right. Well, because Saul's talent took him somewhere that his character couldn't keep him.
Yeah.
He had this ability to get there, but didn't have the ability to stay there.
I think people too have this vision of themselves, in leadership. And I think Jacob had this vision of what he would be if it was going to be Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Well, I have a vision of myself, and sometimes we have a vision of ourselves. And I don't think it's altogether wrong. It's a little immature sometimes, but Jesus demonstrated what leadership was by washing feet. One time I was out with a guy and I asked him a question years ago. How do you grow a church what's the structure to grow a church to 1,000? This is back when there weren't too many churches of 1,000. And so he was drawing on a really bumpy little napkin with a felt pen, and it was kind of like ink was spreading. But he drew a cloud and put God in it. And then he drew a little box and put the pastor in it. And then he drew all these other boxes, and then he put something between the cloud and the pastor, between God and the pastor, and it kind of soaked into the napkin. I couldn't tell what he was writing, and he baited me what he did. And then I pointed it out. I said, "What's that?" He goes, "Oh, between God and the pastor." I said, "Yeah." He said, "That's the pastor's wife." But we have this vision of ourselves as the head of the church,
Right.
But that job's already taken. I mean, think about it. Christ is the head of the church. We're not the head of the church. We're not the head of anything. We're actually the feet. Jesus showed us how beautiful are the feet of them that carry the gospel of peace. We carry the burden of the church like the feet, and we go first as leaders, but we go first like feet go first.
Awesome. Great stuff. So we got some questions coming in. Students, encourage you to go ahead and pitch us a few more. Um, we just want to talk for a moment about false humility. So obviously, humility is a baseline characteristics of a leader, someone who's humble. But this sense of false humility, where maybe they're saying the right things, but it's not coming from the right place. And how would you coach someone who is consistently displaying false humility?
Wow. That's a hard conversation to have. And I think that sometimes people, it's like the bike that your dad tells you to, pull in out of the rain. You don't do it, and then it rusts. I think some things people have to go through a process. If it can be corrected in the sense of a step, like you said this and what you needed to do was this, I would have that conversation. If it's a general conversation of, look, you're just always showing humility, and it's false humility, that's not a good conversation. I think people have a need to be important. Where that conversation starts is not attacking the false humility. It's giving them a sense of purpose and getting them comfortable with being in their lane, right? So that they are able to have a sense of worth. Most people who are demonstrating false humility or even cockiness are hiding a sense of insecurity. And a lot of people feel very insecure. And so they're striving for things. They're trying to find this spot where people will respect them, And I think one of the great things I like to do in ministry is make people feel comfortable that they are valuable in the area that they're valuable in. If they can't learn that lesson, you can't teach them anything anymore. Right? If they can't get comfortable with that, you can't teach them how to be humble. Right? We practice humility. I think that's a good practice. All of us have to practice it. You have to zip your lips sometimes.
Right. And I don't know, it's definitely not original to me, but I've heard it said that, humility is not thinking less of yourself, it's thinking of yourself less. So where the practice of humility really isn't saying, well, I'm not good at this. I know, there are times where I walk off the platform on Sunday morning going, yeah, that was pretty good. And if someone says good sermon, I'm not going to go, oh, well, it's just not like, yeah, well, God bless me to do that. And then there's other times where I don't feel that way, but whenever if you're good at something, there's nothing wrong with knowing where you're called, knowing where you're uniquely gifted, knowing,
I was thinking of that Good to Great book, the Level 5 leader who, this is a practical way that it kind of shows itself, that when he's criticized, he looks out the window or he looks in the mirror. And when he's complimented, he looks out the window. In other words, if you come and you have something to say that's bad, a critique, he will take it. He'll look in the mirror and try to correct himself. If you try to compliment him, he'll look out the window and say, well, my team is awesome, and this and that. And he'll be genuine about it. He's looking out the window, somebody to cast it to. Right. But people who are not humble do the opposite. When you criticize them, they look out the window for somebody to throw it on. And if you compliment them, they look in the mirror and smile big and adjust their tie.
Yeah. And the one thing before I move on to the next question, I would add to the question that I think is so important is that to realize that we're not supposed to lead our team to complete a task. We're supposed to lead our team, meaning that we care about them as people, not because of what we're trying to get done. And sometimes in a coaching culture that focuses on performance so much, we forget that, man, these are people that are working 40, 50-hour work weeks, and they're having trouble at home with their kids, and they can't pay their bills. And so then we got to keep in mind that when they come to us with personal issues or flaws or defects that need to be coached, to really start with okay, if you're projecting this false humility, there probably is some kind of self-esteem issue. There's some kind of issue below the surface. How can I help you as a person? Not how can I help you fix this so that we can go do that. And I think that's such an important thing to remember when we're working with volunteers, particularly. That we can't be so task focused that we forget that we're called to lead our team as people.
And if you're going to have a hard conversation like this whole humility thing, you better have built a relationship like that with somebody. They better know you love them. And I think that's why I've been successful sometimes at having those kind of difficult conversations is because I've built this loving relationship. They know that I'm for them. I'm not sharing this with 20 people. I'm not telling my wife even sometimes things that I say to people because it's so private and it could be so hurtful. I love them. And the only reason that I would go square off on them is because they're hurting themselves. So you better have that bridge built before you go have a conversation about false humility.
Great. Wonderful. So another question that came in and asked me to repeat the 3 things I said at the very beginning, the 3 tips for being successful for DLI. So I won't expound on those because you can always go back and watch the recorded version and catch kind of the fuller explanation. But the 3 things that I mentioned, and I'll just mention them, is don't just be a student in the program, but of the program. In other words, be sure that you are not just studying your books, but you're taking it up on yourself to learn how things work, so on and so forth. To submit to processes, not just people. Meaning whenever you signed up for DLI, you do not sign up. It's important for you to understand, how things work and to be okay with how things work, just like you are at your church. Finally, you always have time to do what you want to do. So most of us do not have a time management issue. We have a self-management issue. We all have the same amount of hours in a day. Some of us get a lot done, and some of us get very little done. So it's not a time issue. It's managing ourselves. So just take that excuse off the table because you're going to be too busy to do your work one week. It's going to happen. So just go ahead and take that excuse off the table right now that you don't have enough time, because you do. Anything else? Any more questions? All right. Well, appreciate your time, Paul. Thank you for being with us this evening.
You bet.
And look forward to having you back soon. And I know the students are going to really enjoy you leading the internship as well. We have a deadline in the classroom for when you need to participate in the forum about this webinar. So you'll have a chance to discuss it with one another. And also I know Paul will be monitoring that and be able to maybe answer some questions more that you might have that you didn't ask live.
There were 2 other forums that, the response to the syllabus, and then also the forum that kind of talked about their service. I think very important that they get that out of the way quickly too.
Right. So be sure to go on through the forum. We'll send out notes from this webinar to you as well. So be sure to just get in the habit to check your internship course just as often as you check your Intro to Bible course or Old Testament or New Testament or Servant Leadership, whatever course you're in. Be sure to get in and do that. But appreciate your time. Thank you for being with us tonight, and enjoy your weekend. Enjoy the rest of your week and keep up the good work. Bye-bye.